Hello, this is Glenn Krause from AE and Associates with another great podcast, the Clinical Documentation Intelligence Podcast, also known as a podcast for the CDI. Today we have Kyle Boyd, a longtime CDI professional colleague of mine who I consider a visionary in CDI. Kyle, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, Glenn. Thanks for that introduction there. Yeah. So I've been a nurse for about 11 years now. Been involved with CDI for about 5 of those years, and I've been lucky enough to touch just about every aspect of CDI work in that time. Mm-hmm. But I'm still learning something new every day, and so I'm excited to see what topics we get into.
Yeah, great. So let's start out. I want to get your thoughts. I just love your statement on your LinkedIn profile stating, working to change the clinical revenue cycle for the better. All hospitals today face strong financial headwinds, as you're aware. We read about it all the time. Hospitals closing down, filing bankruptcy, particularly rural hospitals, and they face the same inflationary pressures we all face as consumers. I just came back from the store. I got one bag, cost me $27. One bag. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Continuing, and I didn't buy any junk food. Continuing labor shortages, problems discharging patients to post-acute care settings, lower reimbursement from payers, including Medicare and Medicaid, as well as commercial payers. Because how goes Medicare? How goes commercial payers? Now we factor in these payer denials that we're seeing, I'm seeing, and you're seeing, and even takebacks that we all are seeing in the revenue cycle. What is the most limiting factor in the revenue cycle that needs to change to improve the revenue cycle for the better? What is under the theory of limitations, what is that thing that needs to change to improve the revenue cycle?
So I'm going to be a little controversial here.
Yeah, go ahead. That's why I have you.
That's great. So, obviously there's practical things that are discussed every day about how, we can make the revenue cycle more efficient, mm-hmm. or prevent leakage or whatever. But I truly believe that the limiting factor right now is hospitals and hospital systems not willing to invest in their people and getting good people in CDI positions. Oh. I'm not just talking about salaries here, right? I think, we all kind of know that relative to like a floor RN, CDI salaries are actually an increase for most. But what I'm talking about is investing in them as individuals and allowing room for growth and creativity in CDI programs to respond to these ever-changing environments, right? So just an example, I have a friend who was recently interviewing for some CDI positions.
Okay.
And he said to me, he's like, Kyle, I was getting really frustrated because not a single one, he went to 5 interviews, not a single one asked him about what kind of projects he had done to improve the efficiency of his program, mm-hmm. or what projects he had done with physicians, or any of that, or how they didn't assess his problem solving or his creativity in any way. The majority of the interviews were asking what EHRs he knew and how many charts he could review in a day.
Yeah, that's it.
And if we are reducing this profession down to that, how many charts you can review in a day, then that will continue to be our most limiting factor. This human potential that we need to tap into to actually make a change in the revenue cycle. It's going to take creativity. It's going to take work and ingenuity from people, not just turning over charts. And so until we can kind of have that culture change, that's going to continue to hold us back.
Absolutely. I've seen, Kyle, job descriptions say must meet benchmarks of 25 charts reviews a day, 30% query rate, 70 to 80% response rate, CCMC capture rate of X. Okay, what the national average for hospitals, mm-hmm. is 65 to 70%, and query. DRG congruence rate with CDI with coding.
Yep.
Is that holding people back?
It 100% is, because when we are reducing people down to these just base numbers, you're turning them into no more than just a computer that's trying to just fill a role.
Yeah, you're right.
You're not hiring people, you're hiring button clickers. And that's not what CDI was ever envisioned to be. And I don't think that's what it can continue to be if we're going to
And let me
continue to
ask,
make a difference.
absolutely. Let me ask you a question. How did we get there? What was the what were the instigating factors that turned CDI into widget makers?
Yeah, obviously we can philosophize on a myriad of different ways, but I think like anything, it started out as this ragtag group of, think of it almost like a business. Like you have this startup culture, right, at startups where it's things happening fast and changes are going, and
Yeah.
you have these visionaries and people that want to make a difference, and you're doing all this awesome stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then you start making money. And then what happens when you start getting middle management and corporations involved, right? Then it turns to how can we optimize KPIs? How can we extract the most amount of dollars from this one specific thing? And that's when you swing that pendulum and it turns into focusing on all of that again, instead of focusing on the people and focusing on the change that you're trying to make. And I've always found that to be the number one thing, not just in CDI, but I was in business before I got into nursing. And the number one thing you'd always see with like small business owners is that as soon as they got away from trying to passionately move forward with whatever their business was and focus on, how can I increase my margin, they started to fail almost immediately. And that's kind of what I see happening with the CDI profession. If you can stick with my analogy here, is that we were this startup that was doing awesome, making change. And then we started getting focused on these KPIs, and that's kind of what we've been driven to just hyper focus on, and I think it's starting to become a downfall.
Yeah, I agree. My personal belief, for what it's worth, is I tend to blame it on CDI consulting companies and their software. Not all of them, but some of them that say, hey, buy my software, increase efficiency in reviewing records. Your CDI can review more records in a day. But just I think we agree that just touching a record and saying I reviewed it has no bearance on whether you improve the documentation. Whether you capture a CC or MCC has no correlation with whether you're going to get paid for those, i.e. we see clinical validation reviews off the screen. And I've seen situations where I've done 40 chart review at a hospital with all clinical validation denials, and one of my colleagues, Dr. Jake Martin, who works with me, we agreed with 39 of them. That's not a good number, is it?
Right. No, definitely not.
And a lot of them, they left queries. Just leaving a query doesn't mean you're going to get paid, which leads me to my next thought process, okay? What role does CDI place in improving the revenue cycle, helping hospitals address the negative margins that many are facing? I just read in the Kaufman's flash report for February, they do an analysis of how hospitals are doing from a margin standpoint and operating cost and so forth. They put out monthly, and they noticed the margin for hospitals on average in January was negative 1.0%, down from December 2022 at negative 0.7. That's not amenable to continued operations. So what role does CDI play in improving this? We can't do it by ourselves, obviously, because revenue cycle is from the time the patient is scheduled, but if they're having an outpatient or inpatient procedure, until the time the patient goes through the ERs, admitted, everyone touches a part of the revenue cycle. But what can CDI do to help this?
Yeah, I think that what's often not discussed is, well, let me take a step back here. So again, just from my nursing perspective, right, on the floor, nurses are the ones who have to keep it all together, right?
Yep.
We are kind of this jack of all trades where we have to know the medicines, right? We have to know the procedures. We have to know how to take care of the patient and move them, just like physical therapy, right? So we're kind of touching all these different areas.
Yep.
And that was one of the hardest things for me when I came into CDI initially, was it did feel so isolated in that we were just this lone unit. I'm like, I'm not used to that, right? I see all these other things that are affecting what I do. Why am I not involved when I have this, obviously when I first started, I didn't, but when I have this expertise, how am I not constantly meeting with quality? Why am I not constantly discussing with coding and trying to get both of our knowledges better on coding? Why am I not working with case management on how to capture SDOH better and then get that information so that we can try and preempt reoccurring admissions and those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And that was always the big thing for me. So I think that CDI needs to be leading the way in breaking down these silos and working with these other departments. And I just don't see, we see it talked about, but I don't see a lot of effort actually being done towards that. And I think we need to beat that drum until our dying breath.
Absolutely, and I agree with you. I read these articles in journals, actors' journals, and so forth, and I certainly am not putting anybody down, including actors, but I'm saying I read it, and then I look at their denials that are available on the Definitive Health, and I'm saying it's not working. If
Sure.
I have a hospital that has a hospital that was showcased in one of the journal articles, and they said how it's improving documentation, but in 1 year, in 2021, they had $10 million in Medicare denials. Okay? This is a 190-bed hospital. $10 million. Actually, $10,975,000 in Medicare denials. That's a lot of money. That's $3 million in real revenue. If you look at the percentage that Medicare pays of the claim. So you're right. We need to be breaking down, and not only just breaking down silos. Would you say we should be thinking about how to not just break down? It's like almost like, okay, you're redoing your kitchen, so you tear out everything. Okay, you break down the tops from the plumbing and the electrical work and the lights and the fixtures. Then you have to reconstruct it. I believe. Do you think that we also need to be thinking about how we can reconstruct a collaborative approach?
Totally. I think the whole revenue cycle as a whole needs a renovation, to stick with your analogy, in how we communicate, how we address issues like denials, and how we continue to move forward with an ever-changing landscape, like how a lot of these insurances are moving to pre-claim denials, prepayment denials.
Yeah.
Things. That has been something that I think has snuck up on a lot of hospitals, and they have no idea how to deal with it, and it's going to be
and the volume is coming in is remarkable.
Right.
I know a hospital that's like they're always behind 90 denials. So what are they doing to reduce them? That's my question. And I asked them that question, and I didn't get an answer. I'm still waiting for an answer. That was a week ago. Okay.
I tell you what they're not doing. They're not investing in their people, like I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The only way, there is no magic software for denials right now.
No.
And the only way is experienced professionals who know how to fight back, and you only get that by getting the right people.
Right, I've known some absolutely, Kyle. I've known some hospitals. There's a big hospital system in the Midwest, 12 hospitals in their system. They cut back on all CDI education. No education. No webinars. No ACTIS annual conferences. No AHIMA conferences. That's just short. To me, that's short-sighted.
To me, it is no different than if they would have cut all physician CME reimbursement.
Yeah, but they're not going to be doing that. They're still physicians will have a mutiny, won't they? Think about it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
This was great. Now I want to kind of pick your brain with this. How does CDI fulfill the role? You said they should break down silos. So how do they go about doing that? Where's a reasonable starting point? I have a personal opinion, but I wanted to kind of pick your brain and see where do you think a good. You're on the CDI side, over at the hospital there in Colorado. Where's a reasonable starting point for CDI?
Honestly, it's going to come from CDI leadership deciding that they've got to make a change, and being willing to start pushing their senior leadership to listen to them and get them to allow them to start pushing forward and try something different. And until we are able to do that, we're not going to be able to make much much progress. And I think a large portion also is communicating with each other better. We have Actis, which they have the local chapter
Yeah, state chapter.
program,
Yep.
and the state chapters, and they have a forum and stuff. But to be honest, I think there is a severe lack of regular communication between even regional hospitals on best practices and how they're almost treating their CDI programs like proprietary information. And I just don't see the reason for that. We need more collaboration, intra collaboration between professionals at different organizations to see how things are working at different organizations and apply those best practices. And until we are able to do that and senior leadership sees those effects, we're not going to make much progress.
No, and that leads me to my next idea I want to run by you is, okay, and I agree with what you're saying. In some ways, the CDI profession is significantly handicapped, meaning the CFOs have been conditioned to believe queries are the mainstay, and you and I agree about what queries stands for, right? And the hallmark of CDI, more queries means more CCs, MCCs. It means more revenue, increased case mix index through supposedly better coding. What are your thoughts? Today, how does a CDI professional as a whole, in particular, CDI leadership, how can they educate the CFO on these current limitations of today's CDI processes, consisting of queries? How can we outline the sizable opportunities that we can potentially, as a profession, collectively and individually, we can capitalize upon to improve the revenue cycle? And, including what I think is our metrics should be denials avoidance. That's proof in the pudding. Did we improve documentation? And, is it optimal? Is it sustainable net patient revenue? How do we break down or change the mindset of CFOs? Now, I'm not saying, Kyle, all CFOs, but I can tell you I've been reaching out to a lot of them, and they all tell me their CDI program is going well, and they check off the boxes of the KPIs that we have today, which are task-based and not outcomes-based. So what are your thoughts? How do we, I think one thing you mentioned in particular is that CDI leadership has to realize that we're not operating optimally, and it needs to be changed. That's the first part.
Yeah. And so a piece of that, so I'm going to say something that probably not a lot of people are going to want to hear.
Now let's hear it.
But the point is, we have to branch out as CDI leaders. We have to branch out and meet CFOs where they are instead of where we want them to be, right? What does all CDIs want our CFOs to come to us and be like, oh, this is, what can we do what kind of project can we do to improve, physician documentation? How can we work and move things more upstream, right? That's the dream for all of us. The fact is, it's not going to happen.
That's right.
We need to meet them where they are. And where are CFOs? They are in their own national conferences and associations,
HFMA,
which have almost zero CDI influence. Zero. If you go to HFMA or NHIA, National Association of Healthcare Revenue Quality, all of those, very, very, very little CDI influence. And what we have to do is, as CDI leaders, we need to start getting out there to these places and saying, hey, we have something to say. We have input. We have expertise here that is relevant and needs to be heard by the nation's CFOs, and needs to understand that simply meeting a query benchmark is not enough anymore. And it's got to change. And until we get out there and we start preaching that message nationally as a group, it's not going to work, because the CFOs are going to take their hints from other CFOs, and as a group, they take it from their national association.
Yeah,
until we start doing that, we're dead in water.
No, and I agree, because one of my CFO colleagues in Boston works at one of the teaching hospitals who recently retired. I asked him, well, why does the CFO not open up the hood and see what's wrong with the engine? It's like almost, I said to him, it's like driving, you're going on a trip, you're going, let's say, on vacation with your family. So you check the oil, you check the tire pressure, kick the tires, everything looks good. Okay, but or some like my car, you don't even have to open the hood. You can check the oil through the radio, radio app there. You go. It says full. It gives you reads out in graph form if it's full or not. Okay.
Right.
So they're not even opening the hood to see what's going on. They're taking at face value these KPIs, and my CFO colleague says they just check off a box, and they say, okay, you have a CDI program, sure do, check out the box, and then they get the information from their consulting company or the CDI leadership coming in and showing them, hey, I'm getting all these numbers. So the CFO says, great job, right? Great job, doing well. And then meanwhile, they're getting denials at the wazoo. It's like a car I saw yesterday, Kyle. It was running fine. It was going down the highway, going 65, 70 speed limit. But meanwhile, there's blue smoke coming out continuously. Well, that's what you get with CDI, I think, the way we're doing it today. In most instances is that engine's running good, we're leaving queries, doctors are answering them, getting our CCs, MCs. Meanwhile, we got denials up to wazoo coming out the back end. So I agree with you. We need to get out there in front and educate the HFMA type revenue cycle, starting with our CFO and getting the message out there that checking off a box to say you got a CDI program is not sufficient, particularly when we have negative 0.7% operating margins. That's not a sustainable model.
Exactly. And are you familiar with there's this philosophy ideal called Goodhart's Law?
Oh, no, tell us, audience, about that.
So it's one of my favorite adages, and what it says is that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Meaning that as soon as you take a measure and that becomes the reason for reward, that measure is now useless, because what's going to happen? That you're going to optimize towards that measure instead of qualitatively as a whole.
What's it called again, Kai? What's the name of it?
It's called Goodhart's Law. You can Google it.
That's what I'm going to do, because I want to make sure our audience knows. Goodhart's Law. Oh, yeah, that sounds like a good topic for me for a post on LinkedIn, doesn't it?
Totally. And, this has been my driving measure. Like I said, I was in business before I got into CDI.
Yeah, great. It shows.
It's my driving thought, because as soon as you start focusing on the numbers of something instead of qualitative, not that numbers aren't important, you do need them to make sure that something is not completely amiss and that, that there is some level of tracking occurring. But when that becomes your goal, that is when you start losing the mark. And that's always been my guiding principle.
Absolutely. Hey, and this has been great, Kyle. I'm so glad you took the time to be a guest on my podcast. So listen, any closing remarks or anything you want to, any takeaway message? I know we covered a lot. This has been wonderful. And any closing thoughts to the listeners here?
Sure. Well, I'm thanks so much for having me on. I always love talking CDI stuff, both philosophically and technically. And if I can, you can cut this if you don't want. But
Go
if
ahead.
I could plug something real quick, Alan Frady and I have been working on something, personal project here. I've talked a lot about communication today between CDIs and the industry as a whole.
Yeah.
And where can we do that online? Well, there's LinkedIn, which isn't terrible, but it's very asynchronous. It's not. You can't really have good live conversations.
No, you can't.
There.
No, you can't.
It's not very oriented completely towards CDIs. Obviously there's a whole lot of people on LinkedIn. We have the Actus Forum, which it's great that they have that. It's a little outdated, and it doesn't get probably as good a responses or timely responses as you would maybe want for someone maybe trying to learn. So what Al and I have been working on is creating a dedicated CDI forum that would be both actionable for good information. It would be somewhere you can go and learn from. It would also be somewhere that you can have these kinds of deep conversations and meaningful conversations on that wouldn't necessarily be tainted by other outside forces. And so we're going to be using a program called Discord. For those who may be familiar with it or may not be, it's a It's a forum program. You can get it on the web, on your phone, all over the place. But we are trying to open up the conversation more in the CDI community. And so we're going to be launching that soon. So be on the lookout. We probably will be announcing it on LinkedIn. But please look out for that.
Oh,
and,
great. I'm glad you brought that up.
And
I'll be helped to publicize it with my 10,000 plus LinkedIn.
That would be amazing.
LinkedIn network. So thank you again, Kyle. And everyone put up a good fight. We're in this for the long haul. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.